I had confessed that I was unfaithful to my partner. And in fact, I shared that in the last episode that you and I were on together. This was a really powerful moment of authenticity. It was also a very dark moment, as anyone can imagine, who's both said that and had that said to them. Being on my side of it, I was standing there watching everything, all the plates that had been in the air crash down around me. I knew that in the telling of that truth, I was probably going to lose everything. That's how it felt. And she knew in the hearing of it that the life that she had become accustomed to was changed in a moment and taken away from her, maybe even made foolish. It's a very decimating moment. You talk about eternity squeezed into an instant. You're watching your entire life flash before your eyes. Everything's eroded. Yeah, and I know that you stood there, it's like, oh my God, how we've all kind of been there in some way or another.
Literally time freezes.
Right, time stops. And that's what happened. Well, that night, she stays in the bedroom and I stay on the couch. And I hear her sobbing in the middle of the night. And then she says, will you come in here? So of course I do. And she says, will you kneel beside the bed? And I did. And she says, will you hold my hand? So of course I do. And then she says, will you just get on the bed with me? I do. And then she says, will you just hold me? I mean, these are the unexplainable moments. Why did she choose to do that? And could I have responded differently? But I didn't. And in that moment, the masks are off. We're laying there. It's really probably the first time I've ever authentically held her, and she's authentically been held by me with our masks gone. Now, it could have spun out then, but here's the humor of this. The next day, we're at the beach, feeling real low, real dark. And we're walking down this gray Pacific Northwest coastline, feeling about as drab as it looked. When all of a sudden, a man who is shirtless, long scraggly hair, runs by us. And he's like doing like a personal jog dance, like kind of a Richard Simmons thing, like to like music that he's making, like, and it is a very odd moment. Like we're feeling very down and he is feeling very up. And then as he runs by us, he turns around. So now he's running backwards and he looks at us and he says, why so glum, guys? Now, I don't know if this is something you should say to people who look very down as a couple, but he says it. He went there, and it was so humorous to both of us in that moment. We kind of like cracking up, but he says, what's wrong? Don't you two know that you're each other's teachers? Now, I have to say, if we were people who were a little sharper and edgier, we might have said, screw off, buddy. But it was about the biggest truth of our life in that moment. It was an angel unaware kind of moment. That was like one of those incredible truths that this ridiculously happy gentleman shared with us in that moment, that we were each other's teachers. And I was summoned, so to speak, out of all of the history that she needed to process through. And she was summoned, so to speak, to process through all the history I needed to. And in that moment, we committed, I think, to becoming one another's tutors, mentors in this game of life, this thing called love. Not easy. But if you can, as lovers, decide, no, I have conscripted you to become my teacher. What are you here? What are you proficient in that I need? It's really the thing we think.
It's so true, because should you take it as the opportunity, it can be the opportunity to do all of the shadow work that you would have never done without something like this that's this big. But not everyone takes that choice. That's what I've learned.
Yeah.
Like for me, after that happened in my divorce, I was like, how was I in this relationship? How did I not know? What was my childhood? What was my ancestry? Like I went so deep, and not everyone does that. So what is it that, and how can we, because I'm assuming people listening to this, they want to dive deep. How can we, whether we choose to stay with this person or not, really not, I think what happens especially around the concept of infidelity, is like, screw that person. I remember one of the first books I read, and it was like, leave a cheater. It was like something like that. And it was like, they are the worst people on earth and they are all sociopaths, and just get away from all of them. And I was like, it's very easy to take that perspective, but I also am like, okay, how was I in this dynamic? What's my role? And then it's also easy to go the other end and be like, I'm responsible for it, which you're also not responsible. So what advice do you have for someone who's in a situation like this to really dive into, how can I heal what's in me that allowed me to be in this dynamic without then taking it on as your problem, it is your life's work. It is, but I think we can self-punish ourselves with it as well.
Well, and I think if my partner were here, she would have her own very unique take on this, because she had to do her work around that. And that was the set of choices she made in that moment. But I think, first of all, what I would say is, whether you stay or go, inconsequential, you're going to have to do the work, no matter what, of confronting those wounded places in yourself, whichever side of things you're on. So I can only speak about my experience within that moment. It was so important for me to see the pain I had caused. I think that's one thing that we sometimes leave in that situation. It would have been very easy for her to leave or me to leave. And if that would have happened, I can say, at least in my experience, I might not have gotten to see close up the pain that I had caused this person I loved. But instead, still, I have the weeping in my ears ringing. Still, she texted me today. We're still together, and many years later. And she said, "Oh, I miss you. When are you coming back?" And, I've been gone for a bit on these things. And I said, "Oh, I don't like causing you sadness." You know how many years it's taken to have that low threshold of, I don't want to cause this person pain. But had I not seen that direct impact, I might not have gotten there. So it was a growth curve for me. So I think that one of the things, again, if we're talking about how to live in reality as it is, I actually have to, one, show up to my authentic experience. I can't bypass it. Going back to our conversation earlier, I have to show up to my grief. I have to show up to my despair. I have to show up to my pain. Two, I have to potentially, at least I have the option to describe it. Use my words, especially if I'm in relationship. The pain that I'm experiencing right now is, Mary Oliver says, "Tell me of your despair, I'll tell you of mine." And I think that actually is the core of the beginning of relationship, that I listen to you. She also, within this, had to experience something. And for her, she would later recount, like, it was so important to understand her complicity in creating those situations, which honestly, I would have never said, "Oh, you should meditate on this set of thoughts." Listen, I am the first to say I was not great. But for her, that became an important set of questions. As you kind of said, my ancestry, I want to look at, where did I come from that would have made me tolerate that behavior? Why would I have, all of these things? So both of us began to show up to our own selves with radical authenticity. This is what my experience is. This is who I am in the world. This is what's going on. And then we began to show up in such a way where we listened to one another, not just the parts we liked. I would say that 1-2 step of self-acceptance and authenticity to the other person is so necessary, potentially, to get through those moments. I also want to say another thing. Not everyone should stay. Just like I would say, not everyone should leave.
Yeah.
But not everyone should stay. Some people hear our story, which we had our own podcast dedicated to this, Love Like Hell, where we detail this journey of ours. A lot of people come away saying, "Oh my God, there's hope. Thank God there's hope." And well, there is, but you actually have to have two willing parties.